Good morning. This is the sermon for Sunday, September 5th, Labor Day weekend. And today we're looking at our gospel lesson in Mark chapter 7. And I want us to take a look at where this fits in Jesus' life and his ministry and what it means to us in certain ways. Okay? So let's take a look at Mark 7. It begins in verse 24. Jesus left that place and he went to the vicinity of Tyre. Now you have to remember, this is not in Israel, is it? It's not in Galilee, it's not in Judea. Tyre is in what we call Lebanon today, right? He goes up to Tyre and Sidon. He even gets up close to what is today Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. So he's not in Israel. There's not a lot of Jews up there. What's going on is that as Jesus is continuing his ministry, on the one hand, there are those who are eager to hear him, eager to see his miracles. Great crowds are following him. But on the other hand, he is getting a great deal of attention. He's getting a great deal of political pressure. He's getting increasing danger from the political and religious leaders in both Galilee and Judea. Indeed, in one place it talks about where he's warned that Herod Antipas, who's the ruler of Galilee and Perea, that Herod Antipas is looking for him that he might kill him. And so increasingly Jesus spends more and more time not in Israel and not even among the Jews as much, but rather out in the Gentile areas, up here like Tyre and Sidon, up in what we call Lebanon, and over closer to Damascus, and especially down in what's called the Decapolis, which means the 10 cities, which are 10 Greco-Roman Gentile cities that are on the east side of the Jordan River. And so Jesus is in the vicinity of Tyre, and he entered a house and didn't want anyone to know it, yet he couldn't keep his presence secret. And he wanted it secret, I think, because it's dangerous, because he's got increasing problems with all the crowds. The word about him has gone around, and so he is it's not time for him to go to Jerusalem. It's not time for him to die. And it says, in fact, as soon as this woman heard about Jesus, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit, she came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. Okay, this is interesting because this woman is not Jewish at all. She is Greek, like most of the people in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. I mean, these are people either of Greek lineage in terms of actually, from several hundred years earlier, from when Alexander the Great and all the Greeks came in and invaded. But even apart from that, you may be of Canaanite or Syrian Phoenician race, but yet your culture is now thoroughly Greco-Roman. And you're living in Greco-Roman cities with Greco-Roman lifestyle. You're worshiping the Greco-Roman gods. And that's who this woman is. And yet she's heard about Jesus. She's got a child who is possessed of a demon who's suffering terribly. And so she begs Jesus to drive the demon out. Now that's kind of interesting in a way in itself, in that she's wanting deliverance from the demon. Now, as strange as it might seem, if you're a Greco-Roman person, you may not want the demon driven out, because those demons, daemons, are thought to be gods or demigods, and they are what give you prophecy, etc. It's thought in pagan Greco-Roman culture. And yet this woman wants her child delivered, of course, from the demon. And Jesus gives her kind of a hard answer. He says, well, first let the children, that is the Israelites, eat all that they want. For it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Now that's a rather insulting statement, really, isn't it? Because she's being compared to the dogs. Why? Because she is she's not Jewish. She's Greco-Roman. She's following the Greco-Roman gods, no doubt. And of course, dogs are unclean in Jewish culture. They're an unclean animal, just like pigs are. And yet dogs and pigs and everything are very popular among the Greco-Romans. And just saying that the children of Israel are the children of God. And the Gentiles at this point are unclean because they're not worshiping God. They're not serving God. They're following all these pagan myths and doing all these other things. And she says in answer to Jesus, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Now this is quite remarkable because, if you're a Greco-Roman, especially if you're a person of some position, and which she very well may be, that she comes from an important family, a wealthy family, this is quite a humble response. And it's admitting, yes, we are going down the wrong path. I've been going down the wrong path. But in spite of that, Lord, have mercy upon me. Humbly help me, is basically what she's saying. Then he told her, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. Humility is always the answer, isn't it? Pride is always the problem. Pride, God hates pride. God hates pride. Our culture loves pride. Look at around our culture how we worship people who are prideful, who are haughty, whether it's celebrities or sports figures or politicians. We love someone who's prideful and haughty and arrogant. We think that's great so much of the time, and God hates it. Hates pride. Hates it. Pride is the source of much sin, if not most sin. Pride was the problem, one of the problems of Adam and Eve. Pride is always a problem. Pride truly does go before a fall. And so humility is the right attitude, always the right attitude before God. And that's what she's showing. And Jesus heals her daughter, has mercy on her daughter. Even though, at least before this, it appears she's not a believer in God. She's not necessarily even a believer in Jesus, but she believes that Jesus can help her daughter. And she humbly asks, and he heals her daughter. So she went home and found her child lying in bed and the demon gone. And then Jesus went further. He went from Tyre further north, up to Sidon, which is further up Lebanon. And then after traveling through there, then he goes down to the Sea of Galilee and to the region of the Decapolis. Now, that would be skirting Galilee. Probably never entered Galilee. He skirted probably on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. He never entered the province where Herod Antipas was. And he goes down into the Decapolis, which is an independent area of 10 or at least originally 10 Greco-Roman city-states that are autonomous. They're not part of Galilee or Judea or anything. And he goes into the Decapolis. And there are some people brought to him, a man who was deaf and could hardly talk. And they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. And he took him aside, and away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. And then he spit and touched the man's tongue. And he looked up to heaven with a deep sigh and said to him, Ephphatha, which means be open. That's an Aramaic word. He's speaking Aramaic. That's Jesus' normal everyday language, probably. Aramaic, which is fairly closely related to Hebrew, but it was the lingua franca. It was the official language of both the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And so he speaks in Aramaic, and that's probably what this man, and in the Decapolis, that's probably what they're used to speaking is Aramaic, and so he speaks "be opened" in Aramaic. At this, the man's ears were opened, and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly for the first time. in his life. And so once again, you see Jesus having mercy upon someone who isn't Jewish. This isn't a Jewish area. This is probably a Greco-Roman like the woman was, and heals him. And he commanded them not to tell anyone, because he doesn't want word getting around. He doesn't want Herod knowing where he's at. He doesn't want the authorities knowing where he's at, because they're out to get him. But the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement, saying about Jesus, he has done everything well. They said he even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. So the thing is that after this too, we have Jesus feeding the 4,000. And this is in the Decapolis area also. And this is at least predominantly Gentile. It'd have to be, because it's not a Jewish area. There may be some Jews there. But he feeds the 4,000, and it's very similar to his multiplication of the loaves and the fish when he fed the 5,000 up close to Capernaum in Galilee, and those were Jews. But when he feeds the 4,000, they're Gentiles. And that's symbolic because there's 7 baskets full of remnants that are picked up, and the 7 is always the 7 nations is always a term for the Gentile nations, and so we know that Jesus was feeding and caring for and teaching the Gentiles at that point. So he's setting the groundwork for the gospel being not just for the Jews, but rather for the world, right? For you and for me, at least if we're Gentiles. And so it's for everyone. And not only is the gospel for everyone, but we should keep in mind here when he goes to these strange places. These places I suspect that Jesus had never been before, at least up to Tyre and Sidon and other places. When he goes up to the strange and Gentile lands, the Lord is everywhere, right? And his salvation is present in all circumstances. And that's what we need to keep in mind. You know, Jesus is under tremendous pressure. He's under constant threat of arrest and death, even at this point. And yet he is ministering life. He's ministering salvation. He's ministering healing. He's ministering raising the dead. He's ministering speaking the gospel. And so there's nowhere the gospel is not. There's nowhere that God's salvation is not. There's nowhere that God's help is not. And so as we face these many trials and tribulations, we just seem to keep getting hit with them, don't we? And I really think that God is telling us something as we're getting hit. We're getting hit by a hurricane in New Orleans, and then that hurricane beats a 1,500-mile swath and even brings death and destruction in New York and New Jersey and up the East Coast. We've got these terrible fires here in California and beyond. We've got the plague of COVID-19. We even have locusts and other things happening. We've got the terrible drought. We've got 1,001 things going on. But no matter what's going on, whether it's those things or things in our personal lives, ailments for ourselves, difficulties, terrible crises for our loved ones, maybe even the death of loved ones, as we are dealing with these things, we need to continue to hold on to what? That even in the midst of our difficulties, Jesus is there. Even in the midst of our difficulties, Jesus is ministering the gospel. Even in the midst of our difficulties and our crises and very foreboding times, Jesus is there ministering his salvation, promising his presence, promising his healing, delivering his deliverance, giving us all the things that we need. So no matter who we are, whether we are Gentile or Jew, no matter whether we're in good circumstances or bad, we should rest secure that God is with us. Jesus is with us, and he is giving to us his salvation, his healing, his help. Amen. You have a good week.